This is the first of the days leading up to one of the most momentous days in the lives of our very soon to be full rabbinic colleagues. My name is Charles Middleborough. I'm the Dean of Leo Baeck College, and it's always my great privilege to be able to stand up at what has now become a ritual for us of a Viva day. Sometimes it's a day, at other times it's an afternoon. And it's an afternoon today, and we're going to hear two presentations. Then there will be time then, if any of you have any questions that you want to ask as a follow-ups to Hannah or to Dea. But I don't want anyone to think that this is 5 years gone in a flash, because 5 years can feel very short when it's over, but during it, it feels like a very long time indeed. And so what you see this afternoon is a great credit to Dea and to Hannah for all of the personal development and transformation that they have undergone during those 5 years. I'm also very aware of the fact that there is undoubtedly, in the history of the college, a bigger number of people speaking Portuguese here than has ever been the case. And of course, we're absolutely delighted to see Dea's family with her for this weekend, and Hannah's husband, very warm welcome, and all the rest of you. So I have pleasure now in inviting Dr. Hannah Altorf to speak first.
Thank you, Charles. So my thesis or dissertation is called The Disagreeing Community on the Many Faces of Machloket. And machloket, I for now translate as disagreement, but I will talk a bit longer about what the word means. But for now, it is disagreeing. And I've called this on purpose the disagreeing community, which is a phrase that you might think we should not be doing, but I want to argue we should be claiming that term again, and we should become a disagreeing community. So I'm really looking forward to the questions and answers. So this is what I'm going to do. Yes, it works. So I think it's really important when we talk about disagreement that we have one example in the room that we can all look at. And I've been taking this story of Rabbi Meir, Beruria, and some thugs to different communities, and I'm bringing it here as well as a first example of a disagreement or a machloket, which allows us to start thinking about what is it, what we do that we when we disagree, and what can we say about it, what kind of questions does it bring up. And then I'll say something about the topic, why I chose the topic, but also the term used, and then I'll say why I chose this topic. That's the order. And then I'll talk a bit about a lot of the literature that has been there on machloket. How do we agree, how do we engage in what the literature calls machloket l'shem shemayim, so a machloket in the name of heaven, and what I've often translated as a good machloket. Then I'll talk a bit about reasons for engaging in machloket. I won't do all of them. And I'll end with a final example of Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, his wife, and a pomegranate. So that's the plan. I've sort of bookcased my dissertation with two examples. On the one hand, Rabbi Meir, and on the other hand, Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, Rabbi Meir Beruria, and the other Chia bar Ashi and his wife. And in between, there are some thoughts. And I thought I'll take this structure to this today as well. So this is the example from Berachot. I'll read it in English. It goes, there were these thugs in Rabbi Meir's neighborhood who were causing him a good deal of trouble. And Rabbi Meir prayed that they should die. His wife Beruria said to him, what are you thinking? Because it's written, let chatayim cease. This is a quote from Psalms. Is it written chotim, sinners? It's written chatayim. Moreover, she continues, go to the end of the verse. Is it, and there will be no more wicked, because sin shall cease when there will be no more wicked. Rather, pray that they should repent, and there will be no more wicked. and he prayed for them, and they repented. So I took this example from a book by Daniel Roth, who is one of the writers about machloket, who's writing on third-party disagreements. And he says in the introduction to his book, he added this particular example because his female students suggested to him he might want to introduce some women into the conversation. And what is interesting for me is that he took this example, but he did not change his overall arguments. And I think he actually says Rabbi Beruria is acting as a third-party negotiator in disagreement in a way that is sort of like almost determined by the patriarchy. So that's why she doesn't perhaps change the book. So when I use this example, when I've been teaching this, and I usually ask two questions, like, is there a disagreement? Is there a machloket in this example? And is it good or bad? That opens it up. And what's interesting is that most people pick up, well, there's a machloket between Rabbi Meir, or a disagreement with Rabbi Meir and Beruria. But there's a second one, and actually for Ross, that's the most important one, between the thugs and Rabbi Meir. And then you can start talking a bit about, are they good or are they not good? And then usually the first response is, these are good because they end well, everybody happy, right? The thugs are repent, Meir takes Beruria points, nobody dies. It's good because it ends well. And it's also good because it's a really good argument. Beruria, whom you may or may not know, is one of the very few women to appear in Talmud by name, is very much a Talmud scholar, and she shows herself here to be a Talmud scholar. She asks the Talmudic questions, she quotes from scripture, she does a very subtle grammar point with a dagesh and a tet, etc., etc. So it's a very sophisticated argument, and it works for Rabbi Meir. He changes his mind. So at first, this might seem like, oh, this is a straightforward way of disagreeing with one another. But on reflection, more and more comes to the fore. So for instance, you could say, well, there's no engagement really between the thugs and Rabbi Meir, right? They're not talking to each other at all. And what's interesting is I think the text almost keeps us from them. Like it doesn't say anything about those thugs. They need to be like divinely inspired to repent. There's no direct engagement between them, at least as far as we know. There's also, Rabbi Meir doesn't have to get to say much. So some people have suggested why does he change his mind? And you could say, well, I think one of my commentators on the dissertation said he just ran out the room, slammed the door, got really annoyed with Beruria, prayed for her, and thought if he can pray for her, he can also pray for the... which I think is the best way of thinking about it. We can also think he brings a lot of violence into the house, right? It's like she is in the house, he brings his violent thoughts into the house. What does she do? But then somebody else said, and I thought that was an interesting suggestion too, well, actually, he comes home, he's just been like, had a lot of trouble from the thugs. And then actually on top of that, Beruria says, what are you doing, right? So he might feel twice intimidated by this whole way, a lot of violence against. And then you could say, are there perhaps people we should or should not engage with? Like, are there conversations we should not have? And how do we decide that? Etc., etc. Oh, and there's something interesting as well. It might, because a rabbi praying for somebody's death, so the commentators are quite uncomfortable with that. So it might be actually that Beruria is talking about that. Like she's talking about him as a sinner. Should he die because he's praying for somebody else's death? And he might actually get frightened and think, oh no, perhaps I'll change my prayer. So this is, I think, a really rich example. And I hope the more I bring it to communities, the more answers I get and the more varieties it brings. But it also, I think, is a good way of starting us thinking about, well, this is what disagreement looks like, and this is what kind of questions it can bring up. So that is a sort of introduction. Well, we often, when they ask the question, what is machloket, they actually answer by saying, we often feel uncomfortable engaging in disagreement, but there is the Jewish tradition of machloket, and it's okay, right? So you often sometimes even see the distinction between the two words. The Hebrew word, it's okay, we can be doing that. The English word, no, let's add agreeably, disagree agreeably, or something about that. So the one word has a sort of sense of, it's okay to do this, a sense even of often of identity. This is what we do. We have Jews do. We have a machloket about everything, and it's fun and it's great. And then disagreement makes us uncomfortable. So 2 weeks before I had to finish this dissertation, my synagogue very wisely set up for this wonderful event, which they said, to agree disagreeably. I don't know how to disagree agreeably. So I had to sort of stop writing and go and attend and make notes. But you can see again, the word disagreement gives so much more anxiety. So it's probably true that very roughly, this notion of machloket was introduced by the rabbis. So when you look at clients, you don't see machloket meaning disagreement, it means division. But when you then go to Yastro, you see it means division and disagreement. So this is really a rabbinical word, very roughly. It's probably much more subtle than that the rabbis have put up in order to talk about a way of disagreeing that is okay. So there was a lot of disagreement going on, perhaps to stop this kind of disagreement. So it is very much a rabbinical term. And the most recent book that I'm reading on this by Daniel Taub, Beyond Dispute, which has just come out, but after my dissertation was done, says actually perhaps we are in similar times. There's similar times of disagreement, and perhaps we should look at these terms because of that kind of word. So there is a sort of different, you could say, emotional aspect when we use particular words and when we use other words. And it's good to keep them in mind. In my dissertation, I mostly used machloket and disagreement intertwined, sometimes used conflict, but I think that's a bigger word and also more specific. I've just to have one word in it. Actually, the Dutch has a good word for this, I think. So oneenigheid means disagreement. That is the translation of disagreement, but oneens means not being one, which I think is really nice as a translation. I think Kleins and Jastrow would like that as a translation. So I thought I'll just give you that. But it doesn't work when you go back to English. So that by means of the word. So why did I tip this project? I'm learning this. Why did I pick this topic? Initially, I just thought this is an interesting topic because before I joined the college, I was a lecturer in philosophy, and I did a lot of philosophical dialogues in a very, very specific way that I really can't explain now. But one of the emphasis in that particular, so I would sit in a room with 8 people and talk about a question for 3 days in a row. It's a German method, so they take their time to talk about one question and one example from experience. And to be honest, I had planned to do a day-long dialogue on the question, what is good disagreement, on the 8th of June? And then I got COVID, so one of my colleagues did it. And so I'm still really hoping I can do a Socratic dialogue in that particular very German way, hopefully for 5 days in a row on the question, what is good disagreement? But I haven't. But what's interesting about this method is that it says you always have to start from experience. And again, right, so I often think when I teach this, I ask people to give an example from experience before we start. And in this case, I took an example from Talmud, but that there's something concrete in the room. So that was my initial idea of almost confronting the Jewish tradition of talking about machloket with this Germanic tradition of having philosophical disagreements. But then, of course, once I started working on it, well, and even before I started working on it, there were also sort of experiences that make this a very acute kind of topic, right? So since I think in my introduction, I named 2 events. I think there's one, the event of COVID, which was 5 years ago when I started the college. The very last, our interview week was the week in which we moved apart because the lockdown started on the Friday, I think, and we were there until the Wednesday. So that's one where we were much more isolated. But I think since the 7th of October, also in different communities, we have had machloket, but actually what has been even more loud is the silence, and we have not been able to engage with each other. So that has been an undertone in my dissertation, but I haven't talked about it explicitly. But it is an important one to keep in mind. And what you then often find is that people go to quick solutions in order to solve this. So a lot of the literature does, I mean, it's not necessarily, oh, wow, this is really subtle. Here we go. So a lot of the literature, there's some like what often happens in the literature is says, okay, we are in a disagreement. How do we solve this? What does our tradition tell us about how we engage better in disagreement? And then we have this division between machloket l'shem shamayim, machloket lo l'shem shamayim, disagreement for the sake of heaven, or as I sometimes translate it, good disagreement and bad disagreement. And then it's almost like, let's engage in good disagreement, let's not engage in bad disagreement altogether now. But of course, it's much more difficult to see how you do this. The example then in the Pirkei Avot text is Hillel and Shammai. Of the good kind of disagreement, of the bad kind of disagreement is Korach and his posse. And I always have a weak spot for Korach. I never know exactly how he was failed. But what you then get is, so for instance, in one of the books, work by Kaminsky, you get just such an incredible wealth of suggestions what you can do in order to disagree better. So for instance, there is, and I think you have like a year full of sermons ready in that book. So one of the suggestions is that tochacha, you have to rebuke or revoke your friend and tell them when they're doing something wrong. Some of the other suggestions are also more psychologically, like check your intentions. Some of our suggestions are very practical, like debate the argument and not, or the issue and not the person, try to check your emotions, etc., etc. And I think these are really good suggestions. There is an overflow of suggestions. So when you are in a disagreement, you would have to have a sort of checklist, like, am I doing all these 25, 30 plus things? But also I think but at the same time, a lot of that we know, right? Counting to 10, I think all of us have been taught at one point, it's always right to count to 10. The difficulty with this is I think we sometimes rush them to end the disagreement. Another difficulty with it is that some of these have a particular power relationship, and some of these are a bit too ambitious. So check your intention, for instance. I'm not so sure we are always aware of our intention, but you can also think with the emotions, like don't get angry. But often that can be an argument from a power relationship, because if you are at the very bottom of the power relationship, you have all good reasons to get angry. And if you are at the top of the power relationship, you don't need to get angry because you're at the top of the power relationship. So if then the top of the power relationship says don't get angry, you might actually reinforce power relationship that started that disagreement in the first place. So there's lots of good ideas, but there's also lots of, I think, suggestions you might want to think a bit longer about that. But what you find in the literature is that, and I'll do this very subtle, yes, is that shalom, peace, as I translated most of the time, but shalom means much more, of course, becomes then one of the top terms to think about disagreement. And I think this is a good reminder. This is a good reminder that disagreements can go very, very topsy-turvy. And this is the text I liked best to show that, because I think it's quite a radical text. And it goes as follows. Rabbi Elazar HaKappar used to say, love peace, or love shalom, and hate disagreement, machloket. Great is peace, for even while Israel worshipped idols and there's peace between them, the divine presence, the Shekhinah, is, if that were possible, not able to touch them. A synagogue in which there is disagreement, machloket, will ultimately be a house of idol worshipping. And a house in which there is disagreement will ultimately be destroyed. So this is from the very last chapter of their Sutta, a small tractate, which starts sentences with great is peace, great is peace, great is peace. There are two versions of this in the library. One is from 1888 and one is from 1935. And when I discussed this with Tali, we really like this one because it's even more radical than the one from 1935. So this is the 1888 version. And I think what it does for me is, right, it really points to the dangers of disagreement, which I think we all feel when we use the word disagreement, and which we have all experienced. It can go really, really wrong. It can be incredibly destructive. And there are other passages in the Talmud where it's clear that it's not sort of like the small people who can't disagree, but the rabbis are okay. There are also stories where two rabbis fight and they almost tear a Torah scroll. They actually do, but the Gemara doesn't like that and sort of takes a step back and says, "Did that really happen? It's too horrible to imagine." So it's not as if the hoi polloi can't fight, are not able to fight, but the elite is. This is a danger for everyone. But here it's sort of in a fantastic hyperbole, it says peace is so important that even we can be worshiping idols, still that would be better than being in disagreement, right? So it's an incredibly forceful idea. So here I just take a step back, and what I want to say, what you see, and then I'll say a bit about where I take this disagreement. So what you see a lot is lots of tips, lots of worrying about the destruction that comes with disagreement. And I think from that we just decide, well, why should we engage in disagreement at all? It's going to destroy us. It's not going to bring us anything, etc., etc. So that is the real concern when you write about disagreement. So far, so good. And I still have about 10 minutes or something. Yeah. Okay. I won't need all of them, I think. So what then to do with that? So there are all sorts of reasons to engage in machloket. We already said you want to get to peace. You could get to truth. I have a chapter on that. I'm checking that out. You could also say you want the other person to fall in love. I think often people sort of disagree with another to fall in love, etc., etc. The one reason I want to add comes from the work of the German-American philosopher Hannah Arendt. In her last work on the life of the mind, she makes a distinction between meaning and truth. And she writes this. She talks about the unanswerable question of meaning, which asks not what something is or whether it exists at all, but for what it means for it to be. And I think this is a fantastic distinction that she makes. It's not discussed enough in the Arendt literature, but it's a really powerful distinction. What she means by that is that whenever we talk about something, there are always things that are, for instance, factual, and then there are things that interpretation that puts on top of it. So if you think back about the story between Rabbi Meir and Beruria, if I want to put that in a sort of factual description, it almost loses all meaning, right? I could say, oh, there were some people in Rabbi Meir's neighborhood and they said something to him, which makes the whole situation almost meaningless. But the moment I start saying they said nasty things of him or they were thugs, I'm already interpreting the particular situation. And so it's really hard to make that distinction between what is factual or truth and what is meaning, what is our interpretation on top of it. But it's important to keep that distinction in mind, even if we can't always make it. And Arendt says, what we do in disagreement is talk about different meanings, and we need that in order to make sense of this world. And the examples, simple examples, is why we need other people. If you look at this particular paper, I know it's paper because it feels like paper, it smells like paper, it doesn't smell, it looks like paper, it sounds like paper. And all of you, and that's the second level, are treating this as paper, right? I'm not holding, I don't know, a rat in my hand or something like that. You would not be sort of smiling at me that way. So this is where we can say, well, there is something, but we always put meaning and we relate. In order to make something real, we need other people to acknowledge our reality. And meaning is what we interpret, what we put on particular ideas. And you can think that again when you think about the discussion between Rabbi Meir and Beruria. I mean, what are they disagreeing on and what is the outcome? I think what Beruria is asking Rabbi Meir, if I translate it into meaning, I'm thinking she's saying, what kind of world do you want to live in? Do you want to live in a world where people pray for each other's death, or do you want to live in a world where actually the two people can sit together? And I think he chooses to be the other man. You can say when we read about the story, you can also think about meaning when you think about the thugs, for instance. Like, what is the role of the thugs in that particular story? Are they there to make Beruria look super clever and very ethical? That might be one way of reading them. Are they there to say, well, actually, everyone has a soul, even if you find them super annoying, they still are worth existing? Are they there to change Rabbi Meir's prayer practice or our own prayer practice? So they have all sorts of different roles. And you might also think, well, perhaps the thugs in their minds are actually freedom fighters, right? Yesterday's terrorists are tomorrow's freedom fighters, perhaps because Meir lives at the time of of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Perhaps they are there to engage, make him engage in a sort of revolt, and he's refusing to do that. So often when we're thinking about disagreement, I would argue we are trying to figure out the meaning of a particular event. And for that, we need as many positions as we can think of, because the more positions we know, the better we can understand the event that is at hand, right? So how the story of Beruria and Meir becomes more and more rich for me, and every time I teach it, I change my mind slightly. That's because I get more and more, I really invite people to talk about that, and I want more and more ideas. And in this case, it's also really important to get ideas from people you don't agree with. So if you're moving for peace, it goes easier if people are sort of in the same field. But if you're looking for meaning, it's much easier to go for particular situations where people are really disagreeing with you. It's also important then to have yourself in the, it needs to be you, it needs to be in that, and it's a constant changing idea. So that's the idea that we can also engage in machloket in order to find more meaning. And then we look for disagreement, and we don't want people to solve it necessarily. There is a nice text that sort of solves it. I just read this out, that I think illustrates this idea very well. In our tradition. So Rabbi Yana says the words of Torah were not given in a clear-cut manner. Rather, for everything about which the Holy Blessed One spoke to Moses, he would offer 49 views for it to be pure, 49 views for it to be impure. And Moses said in view of God, teacher of the universe, when will we understand the correct sense of the thing? And God said to Moses, go according to the majority. If the majority rules it's impure, it's impure. If the majority rules it is pure, it is pure. Now, there's a lot to be said in this text, but the one sentence I want to focus on is, I have translated when we understand the correct sense of the thing. You could also say, when will we have clarity on the thing? In some of the Pardes material, this is translated like, when we will have the truth of the thing, but the truth, where truth is not in the Hebrew text. And this is, I think, a sort of invitation for us, right? We get this text that is not at all clear-cut, and we want to get 49, which is as many as is possible, views on it. We always want more views on this particular idea. I think I'm no close to my time. I don't have a watch here. Okay. Why do we want that? I'll just say two more things. One is, yeah, can I have 3 more minutes? Is that okay? Okay with everyone? Okay. So why would you want that? Because if we don't have that, people might end up being very lonely. It's a political idea in Arendt. I can say a bit more about the question, but much more than in question and answers. I want to illustrate this with a final example from Kiddushin, which is a very different form of disagreement. So for those of you who don't know this story, there are 2 parts before it, but some of you do know the story. I know. So this is a story in 3 parts. And before you start reading it, I might tell you the first 2 parts. So first part, Rabbi Chiba Ba'ashi is praying, let the Yetzer Hara be away from me, right? He doesn't want to have, as usual thought, sex with his wife. So he's praying there. His wife one day overhears him and says, why is he doing this, right? What's the question of this? Scene number 2, she dresses up and walks past him while he is studying in the garden, and he desires her. And he says, what's your name? She says, Geruta. Rashi says, that's the name of a famous prostitute. He wants her. She says, get me that pomegranate, which is a symbol for fertility. He goes into the tree and gets the pomegranate. End of scene 2. We all know what happens when the curtains are closed. And then we come to scene 3. So he says, when he came home, his wife was heating up the oven. He went and sat inside it. She said to him, what is it? And he said to her, such and such happened. She said to him, it was me. He did not pay attention to her until she gave him sign. So this is a reference that she sort of made it clear. It's a reference to a biblical text as well, but she made clear that it was her. And he said to her, I, in any event, intended to do what is prohibited. And then this last sentence is not in all the versions. All the day of that same righteous man, he afflicted himself until he died by that death. Now, this is a very different form of machloket, right? Because at the start, you could say, is there a machloket at all? They're not talking to each other. Can we call that disagreement? And I want to argue yes. And it's actually the worst kind of disagreement, where there is pure silence and the people are completely isolated from one another. And that's the disagreement I'm really concerned about. What's more, they're both hiding. Like, he is pretending he's an angel and has no body. She pretends she is a prostitute, right? So they're both in hiding. And then they move from the garden. I mean, the places are really, really important here as well. They move from a sort of public place, perhaps, where she overhears him. They move to the garden, which may be a reflection of the Garden of Eden. Then they go to her place. Like, he literally comes to her place, which I think is what he does is what Arendt would call the imagination goes visiting. He really tries to find out, where does she stand? What is her position? And they're there in the kitchen then without any kind of disguise. They're there staying one in front of each other. And that's the point in which they can start engaging with one another. And it's a beautiful situation because you can almost distinguish the facts from the interpretation. Both agreed that they slept with one another. One thing, it's a good thing because they were husband and wife, in fact. One thing, it's a bad thing because his intention was to sleep with someone he thought was not his wife. Now, that's a beautiful way of presenting the disagreement, but they needed to go through something that does not look like a Talmudic argument, namely disguising yourself as a prostitute and using your husband and all that, in order to come to this particular position. But I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about what machloket can do as well. It comes in all sorts of varieties, and then there's no solution from heaven. And I think this is why I like to think that last sentence isn't there. This is where the real machloket begins. So, to conclude, in one foot, if you've missed part of it, I don't blame you, but this is my message to you. If you want to reach out to your fellow, you may have to disagree with them. Now go and study.
Question.
You have to disagree with me. Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, go in.
The last story that you brought up, there's a text in Menachot 44a, another story with prostitutes. And this is about a man who is like very worried about seats. He's climbing up all these beds to get, he's like hit in the face by his seats. And he eventually engages in a conversation with this woman, and they talk it through, and eventually they get to get married, and, happily ever after, whatever. And I thought it was a really beautiful illustration of the inverse of that story. Like, that story was all about the fact that there's a silence. They're not talking about the bad machloket. And I just wanted to raise that there's also a text which shows like a good machloket with like a very similar structure that acts as a really nice foil.
I look it up. Thank you. I mean, that's a beautiful way of also saying, well, actually, disagreement can make you fall in love with one another, right? I don't have an example for that, so thank you. That is fantastic. Yeah, I love that. Kershon.
I don't know if you're familiar with it. There's an outfit there, US-based, called Resetting the Table. And I heard a presentation about them. It's founded by a rabbi, and it prescribes a very specific framework for setting forth one's ideas, the nature of the disagreement, and one's commitment to it, and then working from that position to truly understand the other party. The presentation was brief. I don't remember the framework, and I thought it would be difficult to hold to that framework myself, but it does present an interesting basis for not just the disagreement itself, but the commitments that bring someone to a particular viewpoint and exposing them.
Yeah. So I think I might have done one session with them. So Pardes offers a really interesting 8-week course in disagreement. And I think there might have been somebody from that. But I'm not sure if it was that or it was something else. So I always think that's great, right? Like, if you have a particular format, it's really wonderful to follow that. I also think it might sometimes prevent you from having a disagreement. So this is why I like that last story so much, because often we don't get anywhere with a disagreement. We just sit in the same room. And that's not necessarily bad. It might be that we're sitting in the same room is all we can do, but an actual disagreement to get there is really hard. And so this is why I think the Socratic method for me sometimes is really useful, because even there in those 5 days of method, I think if we have a disagreement like 3 times in those 5 days, I think it's like a real, where we really go into something, it's a lot, right? So, and I think it's really useful to have a framework, as long as you know it's a framework and we can chuck it out, right? Because nobody would tell you dress up like a prostitute. That's how you will, you know. that asks for Fingerspitzengefühl or something like that. Yeah. But I'll look it up. Yeah, Elle.
Hannah, I think you've done a wonderful job of showing just how useful and fruitful it can be to have disagreements. And I'm wondering what you think the role of the rabbi is in helping to facilitate positive disagreements in our communities.
Yeah, so I have a chapter on that. And I didn't look it up. It's a really tricky one. So I think there's different options, possibilities for that, right? I think the first part is, you have to be open to be disagreed with. And I think that is a really important part. Like if you sort of think of, that's why I think we sometimes need a new model of rabbis more explicitly. And I think I use Sheila Schumann to do that, because if you take, for instance, I think she talks about the priestly model, or right, if you come in as the person who knows everything, then there's no sense of disagreement, because first of all, there's no sense that meaning actually matters. It's all about knowledge. And secondly, you know it, so that you sort of take the responsibility from disagreement away from the community, because you will solve it. So there is something about how do you come into a space, and that you come into a space as someone who doesn't know everything, which is hard because the entire community might actually think of you as the person who knows everything. So then you come in, and I think gender plays a role, and you say, well, I don't know everything. Then, okay, why hire you? Not knowing, we can all do. Anyway, so that's tricky. It's the same tricky, like if you, so I'm not entirely sure, but I think making this a joint process is really, really useful, right? Making this a joint endeavor, that you say, well, I can't disagree with you. Well, if you don't disagree with me, well, and if you don't disagree well with your neighbor, I think practicing disagreement on stuff that is not super duper emotional might be helpful as well, right? So that's why I think sometimes I go into a room and I ask for people for examples, but I think I only do that when certainly when there's no recording, but even when there's no Zoom, right? So that you can say, well, what's in the room stays in the room. And then people give sometimes beautiful examples, which you can then use. But if they then give an example that actually is about their disagreement with one another, that might just be too much for talking and both practicing disagreement and then going about disagreement. But I think Schumann says something about a much more collaborative idea of prophecy and of being a rabbi. And I think that is the way to think about this. And also to think, well, not always you can engage in machloket, and certainly you can, you should be careful with it as well, because it is a real danger. There's always that to hold in mind. Yeah. Thank you. Miriam.
As ever, you teach brilliantly, and I've learned a lot today. I guess my question is, how much does the outcome of a disagreement set the tone for the quality of the disagreement?
I think a lot. Yeah. So I think if you aim for instance, if you aim for truth, you will have a very different disagreement than if you aim for love, and if you aim for shalom, and if you aim for meaning. So for me, there is a real difference there, because I think if you say, well, we should be able to agree with one another, for instance, then all you're focused on is trying to agree. And you might not go into the nitty-gritty of what's actually there. But if you take a step back and says, I don't care if we agree or disagree, I really want to understand, you have much more space for going into real depth. Of course, it's not always like as if we can go into a room and decide, like, okay, today we'll talk for shalom, but tomorrow we'll go for truth. Because sometimes, but that will also, I think for me, that's a really important, actually a really important aspect. So if you know, and that's why it's important to make that clear. And that's why it's important to think, okay, sometimes we might be disagreeing for meaning, but if we do that, it's okay that there's different opinions in the room. Actually, that's what we want. The more extreme, the better. But if we want peace, then the more extreme, the better is not the better. Yeah. So I think it makes a very big difference. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, Keith?
Thanks so much, Hannah. Really great. I'm wondering whether refusing to disagree, refusing that locket and choosing silence, maybe something a little bit different than it might have once done in the context of sort of online discourse, where disagreement is literally monetized and encouraged by the lecturing platform. It's just something I haven't seen evidence of, but I wonder if one day we will. A kind of conscientious objection it's sort of in culture wars and stuff. I mean, I'm becoming increasingly attracted to that idea of silence as refusal. And I wasn't. I don't know if I completely got what you're saying. You seem to be a bit suspicious of silence, or at least raising problems with them. I wonder whether silence today might mean something different than it might have meant in the past.
I think there's different kind of silences. The tricky part of silence is, of course, that you don't know what the other is thinking, right? So just to give the most simple example, you're all looking at me very silent for half an hour. I don't know if I can see if you're asleep, but I don't know if you're following or not following. So this is actually, I usually, when I teach, I don't do half an hour lecture, right? So you don't know what silence is. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. So you might think, I'm no longer engaging, that's why I'm silent. And the person you're in disagree with me might say, oh, they agree with me, I'm done, right? I mean, that's the tricky part about silence. But the silence, but I also think there are moments when you should not engage, when just engaging is not a good idea, or it's not possible, or it's too dangerous. But the silence I am concerned about is the silence which comes with loneliness. So the silence when we are no longer engaging with one another, and then the silence when we, at a certain point, we're no longer engaging with ourselves. Like we can't. So English has a lot. I don't know. That's a coincidence or says something about English, but has a lot of good expressions for this, like the elephant in the room, for instance, or gaslighting. So when silence means that nobody's talking about something that is super present in the room, I think there is a really dangerous situation. And people might feel very lonely because they might all think in their individual place, I'm seeing this elephant in the room. Am I going mad that no one else is seeing it? And that does not just mean that they can't discuss the elephant. They might also start disbelieving what they think, disbelieving who they are, disbelieving what the world is all about. So I think that is the sort of silence I am concerned about. Yeah, but I'm all for silence. Like, so when you do Socratic dialogues, and you always have to have moments of silence, and I'm great with that. But the silence that's not speaking, yeah.
And now we've had a question that's come in.
I've got a couple of things from online. Excellent. So one person commented, I don't think it's really a question, if everyone always agreed, there would be no progress. And then we also have a question from Rabbi. What are your thoughts about the influence of the Judah and Tamar story on the Talmudic episode you mentioned towards the end of your presentation? As an example of a machloket, that story seems very rich.
I think it is indeed. I haven't thought much about that, so I'm aware of it. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's next chapter. I think it is very rich. He's absolutely right. But I on the spot, I was reading it very differently, and I was really excited about that. And then, of course, somebody pointed this out to me, and I think, oh, that's really, really interesting. It's not how I'm reading it. So yeah, next chapter, I think. Yes. The one about without agreement, there's no progress is an interesting one. I mean, I think if we all agree, there's nothing. It's really frightening, I would think. Yeah.
Hannah, thank you very much.
You're all too nice. Thank you.
Our second presentation is going to be given by Kulikovsky, whose journey to the rabbinate has covered more miles than anybody else's, and not just here in the UK, but traveling from South America to be here. Like Hannah, she has undergone a wonderful transformation in becoming the rabbi that I know she's going to be. And so it gives me pleasure to invite her to make the second presentation.
Well, you have all seen the privilege that is to study with Hannah, but also how difficult it is to talk after her. My dissertation explores whether the digital cloud constitutes a new sacred space for Jewish existence, and how progressive Judaism is represented in this new world, if it is a new world. So Judaism has always been central to my life, from my memories of synagogue with my grandfather to Shabbat dinners at my grandmother's house with my whole family together, having lots of machloket. And where I learned that sacredness comes from authentic encounters. But in my then German liberal community, or reform community, as they say, women weren't really equally included in Jewish life. So it left me feeling something was missing. The internet opened new possibilities, and I explored progressive Judaism online and was studying to become a rabbi through digital platforms when COVID came. And suddenly, I could start Kabbalat Shabbat in Israel, then come to London, and then work online, and then finally go to Central Synagogue in New York, glimpsing Jewish life beyond boundaries. But when I moved to London, for my in-person rabbinic studies, I encountered very unexpected resistance to the digital world, like screen fatigue, concerns about meaningful online connections, and lots of other resistance. This tension sparked my research, which is how Judaism is evolving in the digital age. People worldwide now follow clergy in the cloud, as I call the digital world, welcoming Jewish wisdom into their homes. The digital realm profoundly influences people, and it inspired my own path to the rabbinate. My story shows that we must take digital spaces seriously. And the question isn't whether technology belongs in Judaism, but how we thoughtfully create authentic Jewish sacred spaces in the cloud. The cloud is a powerful metaphor because it captures a fundamental paradox. Something substantial yet ephemeral, visible yet untouchable, and this marks it perfectly for bridging ancient and modern spiritual concepts. The Hebrew Bible provides rich examples of the cloud as a metaphor for divine presence, protection, guidance, and awe. In Genesis, the rainbow and the cloud marks God's covenant after the flood. a natural phenomenon becomes invested with theological significance. In Exodus, the cloud pillar guides Israel through the wilderness, then manifests at Sinai, both revealing and concealing divine mystery. After the tabernacle's construction, the cloud represents God dwelling among the people. These examples show how the cloud bridges divine and earthly, offering both reassurance and wonder. The use of the term cloud actually dates back to 1922, and it was used for weather prediction. It was a system made by human computers connected by telegraphs. Today's clouds encompasses data storage, software services, and a vast interconnected network. The cloud icon on our devices represents seemingly unlimited power and storage. It has become simply a representation of the unknown. Just as God manifested in the cloud during Israel's desert wanderings, we too can invite divinity into our digital lives. It becomes our responsibility to transform the technological cloud into a space of sacredness and meaning, mirroring our ancestors' responsibility to build the tabernacle for the eternal to dwell among the people. For a place to be sacred, kadosh in Hebrew, it must be set apart from the ordinary through action and intention. True sacredness resides in experiences and moments. Therefore, sacred spaces need not to be physically grounded. Hannah was thinking about our female pond in our conversation before. We can establish them in the cloud, in the pond, anywhere, through actions, creating sacred moments of prayer, study, and communal gathering. Torah's earliest sacred spaces are marked by stones, physical reminders of divine encounters. But the burning bush teaches us something different. Holiness comes from divine presence, not necessarily location. The tabernacle and the temple continued this evolution. Solomon acknowledged the paradox. Even this permanent structure couldn't contain the divine. Even the heavens cannot contain you. After the temple's destruction, Judaism adapted. The Second Temple period shifted emphasis from sacrifice to prayer and study, making Torah the new center and enabling Judaism to grow beyond Jerusalem but then Israel's borders. Synagogues placed Torah in their heart. Wherever Jews settled, they created the threefold institution: Beit Knesset, Beit Tfilah, Beit Midrash. Sacredness extended further. The family table became a focal point of spiritual and communal life. Judaism's survival lies in adaptability, from the temple to Torah, place to practice, ritual to relationships. Ideas and values become the mortar sustaining Jewish life in every journey. Ahad Ha'am taught us more than the Jews have kept Shabbat. Shabbat has kept the Jews. Shabbat creates a sacred dwelling in time. Heschel captured this beautifully, the Shabbat as a sanctuary built in time. And Buber shows us that true meaning emerges from relationship. Community is where community happens. Community is where real encounters with both the divine and others become possible. And then community can manifest anywhere sacred time is cultivated. A dynamic, borderless sanctuary. The cloud works as both a divine metaphor and digital network, offering new opportunities for sacred spaces. Through digital platforms, we build sanctuaries where people connect, learn, and invite divine presence. A community becomes a living temple where connection, action, and sacred time converge, whether situated in a physical temple or in the cloud. So, some time ago, when I was director of education back in my home community, I learned a beautiful tradition from our then director of education, giving students honey cake on the first day of school. A generations-old practice showing children that learning is sweet as honey. Teaching is embedded in our daily prayers as a fundamental commandment. The Shema uses two different approaches, two different verbs for teaching. The Shinantan, incisive teaching that makes Torah so familiar, then we can speak about it without hesitation, and Velimadetem, holistic teaching through personal examples. Teaching became so fundamental that entire communities became responsible for it. Rabbi Yeshua ben Gamla, understanding parents' struggles to educate their children, established that every city should have a teacher. The Shulchan Aruch states that cities without teachers should face excommunication because the world does not exist except for the breath of the children in the house of the rabbi. So, meaning that the very breath of children within the classroom, even the ones who struggle most, is what makes a city worthy to exist. After the first temple's destruction, sages had to envision Judaism practice anywhere. Ezra Nehemiah instituted public Torah reading at the marketplace, translating and explaining so that everyone could understand. The marketplace made God's teaching accessible to all. The goal? Making learning pleasurable. Torah should be sweet as honey on our tongue, as Dan Nichols teaches. And this tradition of engaging learning inspires Jewish educators to develop new strategies. Digital technologies aren't a rupture, but a continuation. Jewish rituals and Talmud already possess game-like structures with role-playing, debate, and rules. New platforms like Bim Bam, My Jewish Learning, Sefaria, with more than 600,000 monthly users, and Virtual Havruta, a new thing, meet people where they are, re-engaging lapsed Jews through technology. Today, the cloud is our new marketplace. One of our most distinguished traditions is storytelling. We are commanded to tell our children about Torah. The Passover Seder centers on retelling our stories of liberation. The sages established oral transmission through the Mishnah. Jewish identity is constructed through stories transmitted ledor vador. As Fania Oz Salzberger puts, ours is not a lineage of blood, but a lineage of text. Narratives form identity, telling kids who they are and what we hope they'll value in the future. Just as stories shape individual identities, they inform how Jewish institutions present themselves today. Branding is how organizations tell their stories to the world, transmitting values and what makes them unique. Just as individuals define themselves through actions and words, organizations must develop distinctive attributes aligning purpose and action and communication, creating meaningful connections that draw people closer to the community, enabling sacred spaces, both in person and in the cloud. And that's where the machloket lies. Clergy often find it challenging to see themselves as brands. Understandably, given the perception that branding belongs to profit-seeking corporations. But here's the reality. If clergy wants their message to reach diverse audiences and contribute meaningfully to contemporary discourse, understanding personal branding becomes essential. This isn't about commercialization, it's about effective communication. Contemporary branding isn't about greed or abandoning values. It's about authentic storytelling that fosters profound connections. This is how progressive clergy can ensure their vital voices reach those who need to hear them. No. Here. The cloud is today's media space. If you're not there, you don't exist in published consciousness. This means institutions need digital presence for cultural relevance. It's like bringing Torah to the marketplace. Make your teaching accessible in a language people actually understand. Maintaining consistent message across all channels and find the most effective channels for your audience. Judaism is rooted in communication with God and with the other. In Torah, we communicated with the divine through the cloud. Communication evolved from visual signs to temple music or written words. Today, the cloud has reemerged as a digital space for sacred connections. Diaspora made communication essential for survival. Letters between sages became the mortar holding Judaism together across distances. Here's the thing. Jewish institutions have been in the cloud from the start. Chabad.org was one of the first 100 websites ever when was launched in 1993. They see technology as God-provided tools for them to spread their message. The digital world is our new marketplace. Institutions and clergy need to clarify their purpose, tell compelling stories, and build cloud presence. This isn't a trend. It's where all generations live now. Progressive institutions must learn to create sacred spaces there. There's no way back. Now, let's explore theology and technology intersect through case studies. Communities and rabbis with strong cloud presence. Success in the cloud means to reach people and real world impact. The three cases that I am going to share, each one built a purpose-driven brand, reached large audiences, and creative positive change. On purpose, I didn't bring neither Brazilian nor British examples for this part of the presentation. So my first example is ICAR. Rabbi Sharon Brous founded ICAR in 2004 in her kitchen in Los Angeles. It became one of the fastest growing and most influential Jewish communities in America. ICAR's secret? Strong purpose. Being a voice of Tikkun Olam. Social justice drives everything. Sermons, social media, public engagement. They offer what they call the whole Megillah online. Events, sermons, daily minyan, everything that they do. In 2021, ICAR launched ICAR from Afar, creating a global community across the US, including Canada, Brazil, and the UK. ICAR understands that the cloud is where conversations happen and where communities must reach people to create meaningful impact for their purpose, which is social justice. My second example is Central Synagogue in New York. It was established in 1872 and is New York's oldest synagogue in continuous use, leading reform institution with a membership waiting list. Isn't that a dream? They pioneered live streaming in 2014. They maintain a strong presence across all platforms with consistent branding, plus podcasts and active social media. However, their most significant innovation is the neighborhood, an online community on a platform called Mighty Networks, launched in 2021. This digital sacred space serves over 650 households across 44 states and 15 countries, with 25% daily engagement. Members connect through daily posts, internet interest groups, and virtual block parties. The neighborhood has become a sacred space for progressive Judaism and for progressive Jewish life in the cloud, proving that authentic Jewish community or online community is possible. My last example is Rabbi Seth Goldstein, called Rabbi 360, who became a TikTok phenomenon among young people as my children. I was first introduced to him by Nina, who is here, my now 18-year-old daughter, who follows him on TikTok. He has over 63,000 TikTok followers and 11,000 on Instagram. He started creating content during COVID when he needed new teaching tools. As he told me, TikTok lets you reach out to people instead of waiting for them to reach out to you. Rabbi Goldstein serves a Reconstructionist community in Washington while building an authentic digital brand. He shows how to do both physical and digital community consciously. He keeps doing it because he enjoys, he has fun with it, and he knows that it impacts young people, like my daughter. We moved to UK. So UK Online Jewish Spaces started in 2005 with young people creating pop-up communities on Facebook. Many of them became mainstream synagogues and sparked new innovations in already established communities. Today's approaches are diverse. We have Abraham and Sarah's Tent, created by Rabbi Judith Levitt in 2022, which serves more or less 300 members as an inclusive online community for those who can't access physical buildings. The Ark Synagogue shows how established communities can innovate. Originally Northwood and Pinner Liberal Synagogue, they rebranded to focus on community within the synagogue, within and beyond the four walls of their synagogue. The Ark pioneered seamless hybrid services, seeing fourfold attendance increases after they went online. They offer supporter membership for online members and celebrated 200 Havdalah services in 2024, proving that established progressive synagogues can successfully embrace digital innovation. So now that we know all this, how are British progressive institutions? Well, British progressive institutions show mixed digital engagement. Overall, British communities focus on in-person gatherings, missing cloud opportunities for inclusion. British clergy also underuse personal social media, and most lack personal website blogs or podcasts. And this represents a significant missed opportunity for progressive voices to reach contemporary audiences seeking spiritual guidance online. I have to say, since we have Rabbi Miriam here, like, it is really an amazing example of how building an online presence, thinking about what you want with that. Thank you for that. So, during my research, people raised concerns about technology, AI risks, social media limitations, data protection, environment concerns, but they almost always overlooked the cloud's positive aspects. Communication professionals are clear. The cloud is the new marketplace. People live there. If we are not there, we are not part of the conversation. We are leaving the table. And we are letting others shape Judaism's narrative. Here's the reality. 79% of UK population uses social media. That's 55 million people. This likely means that 79% of Jewish people live on the cloud. When communities stop streaming, neglect websites or abandon social media, they prevent Torah from reaching their people. If teaching Torah accessibly is our obligation, then building sacred spaces online is equally obligatory. The only viable way to bring Torah to today's marketplace is constructing sacred cloud spaces where teaching is appealing, time is sacred, and connection is possible. As I shared at the beginning of this work, this work is deeply personal, rooted in my Brazilian experience and discovering of Judaism through the online learning and the online world. That journey shaped my research on Judaism's evolution from the desert to the temple, to the diaspora, and now to the cloud. At its heart, this is a search of God's presence in the world, how we create sacred spaces and meaningful connections, whether in person or digital. Rabbi Shapira taught us that Torah should be everywhere. Yes, fear is human and protective, and I know that technology can inspire lots of different fears. But it can't excuse our absence from vital conversations. The cloud demands our progressive presence. Fear should drive us to ask hard questions about technology safety and ethics. These questions can make the cloud a better and a more sacred space. With the cloud, a new mitzvah emerges. Building sacred spaces online, making Torah accessible in the digital marketplace, as Rabbi Shapira taught. Torah should be everywhere. Let me be clear. Technology does not replace human beings. No tool can teach, preach, or create sacredness without human action. But speaking digitally takes courage. Unlike sermons that once were heard once, posts are permanent. They can be assessed, shared, or challenged at any time, as this presentation. Digital presence requires courage, responsibility, and authenticity. When we don't engage with modern communication, we risk becoming unheard by new generations. Brands evolve, artists reinvent themselves, clergy and Jewish institutions must adapt too. Engaging new communication isn't a threat to our tradition. It's how we stay relevant. The form may change, but our purpose endures. Inspire, educate, connect, build sacred spaces. The cloud is the new marketplace. People inhabit this space. Therefore, abstaining from it means to not participate in the conversation, leaving the narrative of Judaism to be shaped by others. The future of progressive Judaism depends on progressive institutions, communities, and clergy embracing the change. There is no way back to the wilderness. The future is in the cloud.
Any questions there?
There's one online.
No? Okay, let's drink.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Dale. What a great privilege to have a chance to listen to you. Obviously, we benefited from you at the Liberal Years Synagogue for the past year, which has been a truly rich experience for us. One of the thoughts that I had, and of course, it's not either or, it's and, is I remember when I served on the admissions board here for the very first time. I remember a student rabbi had been a prospective candidate, as they were, was in a community in Britain, a rural community. And they said one of the things that's been difficult for them is instead of coming to the very small group that they were trying to assemble with some difficulty, they could now log on to the LJS or Central in New York or somewhere anywhere else. And I'm wondering how we get the responsibility of the activity online to say at the end exactly what you said at the end. It's about people creating Judaism in their lives.
So I that is something that is part of this conversation, which is what do small communities or smaller communities, how they react to this. And the thing is, I have seen smaller communities because of lack of volunteers to do that, or because they want people to be in person in the community, because one person in a small community makes a huge difference, and it really impacts. So there are many of those small communities going offline, going back. They were online for COVID, and then they are deciding not to do online things. And I think that there's where the risk of losing people for those online communities reside. If you really create a space, an online space where people so let's use that community that is a rural community, so people don't live near the synagogue. But if you create daily posts or conversation groups where people can connect to the synagogue, you have to think differently. We learned a new, like you newly, wasn't it, with so you have to think in a different way how to engage your community and make them understand that they make a difference if they are in person or if they connect to the community during different days. We have to create opportunities for people to understand the relevance of each of our communities. But that is the responsibility of each of the communities, knowing that if you don't do something, you will lose the people because they will find another way. If a person can't leave home to go to the community, if you don't offer your online services, this person will find another one. And Laliv, Laliv was before.
I want to thank you for a really compellingly challenging call to sort of take a place in this transcendent realm of public discourse that I think is quite courageous. I wanted to sort of challenge you to go from the transcendent to the immanent, and you mentioned briefly all the kinds of concerns and challenges you faced, and one of them was the environment. So if MIT is right, their research shows that the cloud and with AI functionality, which costs a lot more, will use about 20% of global energy. So it'll represent about 20% of our global energy use, which is an enormous, it's an unfathomable environmental cost. Obviously, it's not directly related to this, but I'm wondering ethically, environmentally, in terms of those kinds of rabbinic values, do you have a way forward for us to engage with that problem in a meaningful way?
I have looked. I didn't delve into the environmental question because it's a lot to cover. Like doing this presentation was a challenge. By the beginning, I had 42 slides. and my basic text had almost 3 hours of presentation. But because there's a lot and everything is changing all the time. But I found one thing is we can't avoid AI and technology development because it is happening and it will happen. And sometimes we use it without knowing that we are using it. We decide we're not going to use it, but then we use Grammarly, so which is AI. So we do use AI without knowing when we do internet banking, when we do lots of things. But the environmental cost is also a financial cost to the companies. So it with the technology, with the technology evolving for us to use it, it's also evolving to find more efficient ways and less energy. That's the hope. And I think that what we can do, for instance, I use AI tools for lots of things. For this presentation, I used Canvas, but when I had to choose one of the tools for text, I chose one that is that gives me sources, that is ethically, that is reviewed as more ethically reliable than others. So it's about our choices, and it's about how we choose, what we choose to use and why. You don't have to have all the AI tools. You don't have to use everything, but we have to keep challenging governments and companies to make it environmentally less impactful. And our choices will possibly lead to those actions.
Online questions. The first one is, will you please comment on the need for Jewish communal ethics and the digital reality, especially with the vulnerability of our youth? Thank you for your prophetic work.
Wow.
And then the second question is from National Steam. What would you say to the concern some may raise that we don't have the resources in our British communities to do good quality online community work? Where do we begin?
So I will begin with Robin. There is a saying that's work smarter and not harder. So, and this really applies to how you deal with your online work. You don't have to be everywhere. You don't have to be in all social medias. You don't have to have the latest version of applications or anything. But the places where you choose to be, you have to be you have to keep them. You have to feed them. So if you like, website is like a must. If you don't have a website, you don't exist, basically, nowadays. And then the website must show who you are today. You can't have your 3 past rabbis and then as you're still rabbi today after having like other 3 rabbis, and you don't know who the rabbi of that community is because you heard that it's that one or whoever. You have to be updated. So have a website and have it updated. If you're on Facebook, have it updated. So if you don't need to be everywhere, but you have to do something well done online so that you have a presence. So that's I think, and small communities can do it. And it's possibly a good way to involve young people in your community, going back to the young people. So they know a lot and they know better. My son helped me with making 45 to 32 slides. So youth can help us. And yes, there is the vulnerability online, and we are so afraid of the vulnerability online. But in fact, we were vulnerable in the streets. We are vulnerable in life. So education is the most important thing. You have to teach your children to keep themselves safe, either in the street or online, because it's how you do. And actually, I don't believe in sheltering children too much. I believe in giving them wings and for them to know that they have a nest to come back to, but they can fly to the world and build their lives and believe that they are safe doing that. And I think that education is the most important part of safety.
Last question.
No, Rabbi Miriam was, can I have two, Rabbi Miriam and Michael?
So thank you. It poses brilliant challenges and it's a really interesting topic and not just that we got a name check. But what it made me realise is we've got a very obvious reason to build a brand. We want to get people knowing who we are before we exist in a physical sense. With a call to action that is, and now we want you to walk in the door. I'm interested by the qualitative versus quantitative nature of engagement. It's very easy online to be able to say this many people reacted, responded to a tweet or a post without them really having to have done anything. How do we, have you been able to explore that qualitative piece, which is, are people replacing their scrolling with a bit of Jewish content? And, it's great for our kids to be able to have a rabbi on TikTok rather than someone that's going to encourage dangerous games that are going to lead to untimely deaths and the other reasons that I can't say, the idea about teenagers on TikTok. Or are we actually managing to reach the people who, would love to be able to walk into shul, but they can't, and therefore we're giving them a Judaism they can't access, rather than a lazy Judaism, which is, I can have this on in the kitchen while I'm cooking, and not bother to go to shul, and all of the other things that then gives us. So it's the qualitative versus quantitative thing I think it's the.
I think, but this is like on the spot, in the beginning, it doesn't matter. Because you can be following online services while planting beetroots and post, well, I'm in Wales planting beetroots while I'm here listening to you. At some point, this person will want to be with you and not with the beetroots. Find another day for the beetroots.
Do we need that purpose? Do we need to make sure that our online?
I think that if you, but I think that if you're not online, giving that person the opportunity to engage in services while planting the beetroots, that is what they did with their mother and whatever, you're not giving them the opportunity to engage with text or engage with Jewish life. So I think that we have to give opportunities. We have to say what we think. We have to give people the different discourse. Otherwise, they will be davening and keeping kosher and doing whatever we know it can be possible in the Temple Mount. I don't know. If we don't begin to tell people that you can be progressive, that you can plant beetroots while following service, and then someday come to synagogue and be with us, because it's so nice to sing with us, and now you know the tunes. You can come to synagogue. Or I don't like Pesach, but suddenly when Rabbi 360 explains to me Pesach becomes like really cool. We don't know. We have to tell people what we think so that they can engage with our thought. If we don't say anything, then Michael?
Yes, thank you. I'm reflecting on what you said about the honey cake. Ritual that disappeared from Jewish life, perhaps because something big and new came along, which got called bar mitzvah, and replaced it. So now we have this big new world of the cloud. What could we lose?
I don't think we need to lose. And I think we have lost through times. Like how many rituals we do have that our people began looking for in other religions because they didn't know we do have them. Doing the mikvah, celebrating the moon, doing proper Shiva. So many things we do have. We deal with grief. We deal with nature. We have so many ways but people don't know. So the cloud may be a place where we can tell people, this is how it used to be, and this is how you can see it progressively. And so I think that it's not an either or. You don't I think you lose less than you gain. And I think that the ark, the numbers of the ark show that a lot. If they're in person, like if the people inside the community got so higher after they began to offer things online, it shows that if people connect to you and understand who you are, then they come to you.
Just a few thank yous. I want to thank Victor, who does all of this reasonably unobtrusively, and has enabled those of you who are with us online to feel part of a very special afternoon. I want to thank Dr. Keith Khan-Harris, who is the MA course team leader and who works with our students on their dissertations. I'm sure he is feeling very happy with it all, and he's just given me the thumbs up, so that proves it. I want to thank all of you for coming and just leave you with this final thought. It seems to me that there are two things that have been balanced here in the two presentations, and yet they have a very strong commonality. On the one hand, the art of disagreeing agreeably, and machloket, which is such an ancient core concept in Judaism, and now a modern way of communicating. And of course, machloket can be online as well as it can be. It's been wonderfully relatable too in its different ways, and challenging also. It did occur to me, and I hope you'll forgive me, it did occur to me that I'm very used to hearing that British Jews talk with their hands. I think I would say that British Jews mumble with their hands. Brazilian Jews talk with their hands. Thank you all very much. There are refreshments outside. Do come.